Picture this: a decorated marine legs sacrificed on foreign soil sits helpless as a cop with a badge and an attitude problem calls a tow truck on his legally parked van, the only thing standing between him and total dependence. 5 minutes. That's all it took for one officer's ego to ignite a firestorm that would shake an entire police department to its core. What happened next? Brotherhood happened. Stick with me until the end and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. You won't believe where this goes. The desert sun was already cruel at 9:30 a.m., turning the asphalt of the Phoenix VA Medical Center parking lot into a shimmering lake of heat. The kind of morning where the metal handrails burned your palm, where the air tasted like dust and exhaust, where veterans arriving for appointments moved slowly, conserving energy for the bureaucracy that waited inside those glass doors. Hector Ruiz had made this drive 1,000 times. 68 years old, ramrod posture, even in his wheelchair, Purple Heart license plates catching the light as his modified van rolled into the designated accessible space. Row C, Spot 7. The same spot he'd used for 3 years. The placard hung from his rearview mirror, Department of Motor Vehicles official issue expiration date, clearly visible, 06/2026. Everything legal. Everything earned. The Marine Corps had taken his legs in Fallujah, but it hadn't taken his precision. Hector's van was immaculate wheelchair lift, serviced every 6 months, inspection stickers current, not a scratch on the custom paint job his granddaughter had surprised him with last Christmas. Dark blue, with an eagle globe and anchor decal on the rear window. Semper Fi in gold lettering. He'd survived 3 tours. IEDs. Firefights that turned boys into smoke. He'd carried wounded men through streets that wanted them dead, and had come home to a flag and a ceremony and a prosthetics appointment that would last the rest of his life. But Hector Ruiz had never asked for pity. Just respect. Just the basic courtesy that should come with the uniform even when you can't wear it anymore. That's what made what happened next so unforgivable. Officer Trent Baylor stepped out of his patrol car with the swagger of a man who'd mistaken a badge for a crown. 34 years old, biceps stretching his short sleeves, sunglasses reflecting the parking lot like he was surveying conquered territory. He'd been with Phoenix PD for 8 years, long enough to know better, too comfortable to care. Baylor had a reputation, the kind whispered in break rooms and documented in internal affairs files that somehow never quite went anywhere. Excessive force complaints, harassment allegations, a pattern of targeting people he thought couldn't fight back: homeless veterans, disabled civilians, anyone he could lord his authority over without consequence. And this morning he'd spotted Hector. "License and registration," Baylor called out, not even waiting for Hector to fully deploy the wheelchair lift. Hector looked up, patient smile already forming. He'd dealt with every kind of authority in his life: drill instructors who could strip paint with their voices, officers who'd earned his loyalty through competence and character, VA administrators who meant well, but moved like continental drift. One city cop was nothing. "Morning, officer. Just heading in for my appointment. Everything all right?" Baylor's jaw tightened at the courtesy. He stepped closer, blocking the sun so his shadow fell across Hector's wheelchair. "Asked you for license and registration. You deaf and crippled." The word hung in the air like a slap. Several veterans walking past slowed their steps. An older man with a Vietnam veteran baseball cap stopped entirely, turning to watch. The parking lot wasn't crowded yet, the rush would come around 10, but there were enough people to notice, to feel the temperature change. Hector's expression didn't shift. He'd heard worse. Been called worse by enemies who actually scared him. But there was a principle at stake now, a line being drawn in oil-stained asphalt. "License is in my wallet, sir. Registration's in the glove box. But I'm legally parked in a designated accessible space with a valid placard. Is there a problem? Problem is, I'm investigating a complaint about improper use of handicapped parking." Baylor said, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "Lot of people fake disabilities these days. Game the system." A woman loading groceries into her car 2 spots over actually gasped. The Vietnam vet stepped closer, his cane tapping concrete with sharp, angry clicks. Hector kept his hands visible, relaxed on the wheels of his chair. "Sir, I'm a double amputee, below-knee bilateral, service-connected disability from combat operations in Iraq. My placard is current, and my vehicle is registered with the VA. I'm happy to provide documentation." "Oh, you're one of those," Baylor sneered, leaning down so they were eye level. "Think your service gives you special treatment. Think you can park wherever you want, because you got a medal." "I think," Hector said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of command even from a seated position, "that I'm parked exactly where the law allows me to park. And I'd appreciate the professional courtesy of conducting this interaction with basic respect." It was the wrong thing to say. Or maybe the right thing, depending on how you measured courage. Baylor's face flushed red. His hand dropped to his belt, not to his weapon, but to his radio. A gesture of power. A reminder of who held the authority here. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Silence rippled outward. 3 more people stopped walking. Phones started coming out, not obvious yet, just hands shifting devices, angling. "Officer," Hector said, patience thinning to a razor's edge. "I'm in a wheelchair. I can't step out of the vehicle. I can show you my prosthetics if that would help clarify the situation." "Don't get smart with me, wheelchair boy." There it was. The second slur. The moment when everyone watching understood exactly what was happening. MSG Diego Cruz had been loading his gym bag into his truck 3 rows over when he heard it. Retired 8 years, still built like the door kicker he'd been in Afghanistan, still wearing his USMC t-shirt like a uniform. He'd served with Hector. Not directly different units, different decades, but they knew each other the way all Marines knew each other in the small, fierce community that frequented the Phoenix VA. Cruz walked over with the measured stride of a man who'd breached buildings for a living. "Morning, Hector. Everything okay?" "Morning, Diego. Officer Baylor is conducting an investigation." "Investigation of what?" Cruz asked, his tone perfectly polite and absolutely dangerous. "His permits are visible. His plates are right there. That's a decorated Marine you're talking to." Baylor spun one hand, still on his radio. "This is official police business. I'm going to need you to step back, sir." "Happy to," Cruz said, not moving an inch. "Right after you explain what law Mr. Ruiz has broken." "He's parked in a handicapped space, with a visible placard and Purple Heart plates and obvious mobility equipment," Cruz interrupted. "So unless you're about to tell me you don't recognize a legitimate accessible parking credential when you see one, I'm confused about what we're doing here." More phones came up. An older woman in scrubs, a VA nurse arriving for her shift, stopped by the entrance and pulled out her phone recording openly now. Baylor's hand tightened on the radio. He could feel control slipping. Could feel the narrative turning against him. But he was in too deep now, his ego too invested, his pride too brittle to back down. "I have reason to believe this vehicle is improperly parked and creating a safety hazard. I'm calling for a tow." The words hit like artillery fire. "You're what?" Cruz stepped forward, and 2 other veterans materialized beside him, a younger woman with an Army Ranger tab visible on her jacket sleeve, an older black man with a Navy anchor tattoo and fury in his eyes. Hector held up one hand, stopping the surge. "Diego, stand down." "Hector, I said stand down, Marine." The command voice still worked. Cruz froze, jaw clenched. Hector looked up at Baylor, and for just a moment the officer saw something that made him uncomfortable. Not fear, not anger, just assessment. The kind of look you give an opponent when you're calculating how many moves ahead you need to think. "Officer Baylor," Hector said softly, "I've provided proof of my legal right to park here. My vehicle is not creating a hazard. If you proceed with this tow, you're not just violating policy, you're humiliating a veteran in front of his community for no legitimate law enforcement purpose. Is that really the hill you want to die on this morning?" It was a chance, an exit ramp, a way for Baylor to claim he was just doing his due diligence to mumble something about completing his investigation and walk away. He didn't take it. Baylor keyed his radio voice loud and deliberate. "Dispatch, this is Unit 347. I need a tow truck at the VA Medical Center, 650 East Indian School Road. Priority." The radio crackled. "Copy 347. Tow en route. ETA 12 minutes. Baylor lowered the radio and smiled. Not a friendly smile. A victor's smile. 12 minutes, wheelchair boy. Then your illegal vehicle gets impounded and you can fight it out with the tow company and the city if you want your van back. Might take a few weeks. Hope you didn't have anywhere important to be." The cruelty was the point. That's what made it unforgivable. Not the mistake cops made those. Not the overstep authority got drunk on itself sometimes. But the deliberate, calculated humiliation of a man who'd given more to his country than Baylor could comprehend. Hector sat perfectly still. Decades of discipline keeping his expression neutral, his breathing steady. But his hands gripped the wheelchair armrests with white-knuckle force. Cruz pulled out his phone, fingers moving fast. "Hector, who do I call in Carlin Park?" Hector said quietly. "She'll know what to do." "Grace Park, your old CO. Tell her—" Hector paused, swallowed hard. "Tell her I need help." Those 4 words cost him. You could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his jaw locked. Marines didn't ask for help. Marines handled things. But there were limits to what one man in a wheelchair could do against a cop with a badge and a tow truck on the way. Cruz stepped aside, dialing. His voice dropped to urgent, clipped tones. "Colonel, it's Diego Cruz. I'm at the Phoenix VA with Hector Ruiz. We've got a situation." Baylor circled the van, making a show of examining it, tapping the tires with his boot, peering through windows. The nurse was still filming. So were 6 other people now, phones up, documenting. "You know what I think?" Baylor called out, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "I think too many people abuse these parking privileges. Claim they're disabled, get the placard, then miracle themselves around just fine when no one's watching. Seen it 100 times. You calling me a liar, officer?" Hector's voice stayed level, but something sharp edged into it. "I'm saying I've seen amputees walk. Modern prosthetics are pretty advanced." "I have below-knee bilateral amputations," Hector said, each word precisely articulated. "I spent 18 months learning to walk again with prosthetics that cost the VA $40,000. On good days with my walker, I can make it from my van to the building entrance. On bad days, I use the wheelchair. Today's a wheelchair day. That's my business and my doctor's business. It's not yours." Baylor shrugged. "Then you won't mind showing me. Prove you're really disabled." The crowd actually surged forward. The ranger, her name was Sarah Williams, though Hector didn't know that yet, pushed to the front, her voice cutting through the rising anger. "That's a HIPAA violation," she called out. "You cannot compel a citizen to disclose medical information without a warrant or probable cause. I'm an attorney. This is being recorded. You need to stop talking. Now." Baylor spun toward her, then noticed her jacket. Noticed the ranger tab. Noticed the look in her eyes that said she'd put down insurgents and wouldn't hesitate to put down a bully cop with a law degree. "This is official. This is harassment, Williams shot back. And discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if that tow truck touches his van, it's also theft of modified medical equipment. Do you understand the liability you're creating for your department right now? Somewhere in the crowd, someone started clapping. Just one person, but it spread like wildfire. Applause rolled through the parking lot, sharp and defiant, and absolutely directed at Williams. Baylor's face went from red to purple. His hand dropped to his belt again, and this time it landed near his pepper spray. All of you need to disperse. This is an active investigation. If you don't leave, I'll cite you for obstruction. Obstruction of what? Cruz was back phone still in hand. We're standing in a public parking lot. We're not threatening anyone. We're documenting what appears to be abuse of authority against a disabled veteran. That's our First Amendment right, officer. Maybe you need a refresher on the Constitution you swore to uphold. The radio crackled again. Unit 347, be advised, tow truck is 8 minutes out. 8 minutes. That's how long Hector had before his independence. His mobility, his dignity, his ability to get himself to medical appointments without relying on others got hooked to a chain and dragged away. He closed his eyes, took a breath. In Fallujah, when the IED had torn through their convoy, there'd been a moment just before impact when time stretched. When Hector had seen the dust puff in the road and known with absolute certainty that his life was about to change forever. This felt like that. Different scale, different enemy, but the same sickening inevitability. Then his phone buzzed. A text. One line, Conan. Grace Park, stand, fast Marine. Cavalry's coming. Hector looked up. Baylor was still circling, still making his little power displays. The crowd was still there, still filming, still angry, but controlled. And somewhere in Phoenix, the word was spreading. Not just a text, not just one call, but a network forged in fire, tested in combat, bound by something deeper than friendship, flaring to life like a beacon in the desert. Grace Park's message had gone out to 47 people. Veterans, active duty Marines on leave, reservists, former officers, NCOs who'd led fire teams in Fallujah, Kandahar, Ramadi. Men and women who understood that when the call went out, when a brother or sister was in trouble, you didn't ask questions. You moved. Brother down. Phoenix, VA. Not a drill. Cruz's phone buzzed, then Williams's, then the Navy vets. All over Phoenix, phones lit up. People looked at screens, read the message, made instant calculations about where they were, how fast they could get there, what they could drop or delay or simply abandon. And they started moving. In a gym on Camelback Road, a gunnery sergeant saw the text mid-set, dropped 315 pounds of deadlift weight with a crash that made everyone turn and walked out without a word. In a law office downtown, a former JAG captain read the message, stood up from a deposition, and told the opposing counsel they'd have to reschedule. In a coffee shop on Thomas, a corporal halfway through his civilian degree saw the alert and left a 20 on the table for his $7 latte. They came in pickup trucks and sedans and motorcycles. Some still in workout clothes, some in business suits, some in the faded camis they wore like armor against a world that didn't quite understand them anymore. They came alone and in groups, texting each other locations, and ETAs coordinating without being told, because this was what they did. This was what they'd always done. Back in the parking lot, Baylor felt it before he saw it. A shift in the air. A change in the crowd's energy. He looked up and saw them arriving. First, 2 trucks pulling in fast parking at angles that blocked the tow truck's easiest approach route. 4 Marines got out, 2 men, 2 women, all moving with purpose. They didn't run, didn't shout. just walked straight to where Hector sat and formed up loose but deliberate, creating presence. Then more vehicles, a minivan, a Jeep with USMC stickers covering the back window, a motorcycle with saddlebags that probably held more than cargo. Baylor keyed his radio again, voice tight. Dispatch 347. I'm going to need backup at this location. Multiple subjects gathering, situation potentially escalating. Copy 347. Unit 219 is 5 minutes out. 5 minutes for backup. 8 minutes for the tow truck. And every 10 seconds another vehicle arrived. Williams moved to Hector's side, crouching down so they were eye level. Mr. Ruiz, I'm Captain Sarah Williams, Judge Advocate General's Corps Army Reserve. With your permission, I'd like to document this interaction and collect witness statements. Please, Hector said. And it's just Hector. Copy that, Hector. She pulled out a tablet stylus, already moving. I need your full name, vehicle registration, placard details, and a timeline of events. While she worked, Cruz was organizing the arrivals. Not obviously, there were no commands, no formations, but with subtle gestures and positioning that every Marine recognized. Creating a perimeter. Not threatening, not blocking Baylor's movement, but present. Visible. An unmistakable statement. You're not alone anymore, brother. A gunny with salt and pepper hair and a face like weathered granite positioned himself where he could see both Hector and the entrance to the parking lot. A lance corporal with a camera, an actual professional rig, not just a phone, started shooting video wide angles and close-ups documenting everything. Baylor watched the crowd swell and felt something close to panic. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The target was supposed to be isolated, powerless, easy. This was turning into something else entirely. All of you are interfering with official police business. He tried again, but his voice cracked slightly on official. No one's interfering? Cruz said calmly. We're exercising our constitutional rights in a public space. You want to arrest 40 veterans for standing in a parking lot? Be my guest. Make sure you spell our names right on the paperwork. The radio crackled. 347. This is 219. I'm pulling into the VA now. Where do you need me? A second patrol car appeared, and Officer Janet Reyes stepped out. She was 15-year veteran of Phoenix PD, decorated, respected, and critically, someone who'd worked with the VA liaison office and actually understood who she was dealing with. She took one look at the scene, Baylor red-faced and defensive Hector in his wheelchair with visible Purple Heart plates. 40-plus veterans formed up in a loose but unmistakable show of unity, and her expression went carefully neutral. Trent, she said quietly, walking over. What's the situation? Responding to a complaint about handicapped parking abuse. Subject became uncooperative. I've called for a tow. Reyes looked at the placard hanging from Hector's mirror, at his wheelchair, at the modified lift visible in the van's side door, at his license plates. Trent, she said again, even quieter. That's a valid placard. That's accessible equipment. Those are Purple Heart plates. What complaint? I received someone called in, Baylor stammered. Who called it in? Silence. Trent. Who filed the complaint? More silence. Reyes closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with the look of someone calculating how bad the fallout was going to be. Cancel the tow. I've already... Cancel the tow. Each word separate and sharp. Right now. Baylor's jaw worked, pride and panic warring, but Reyes outranked him, and he knew it. He keyed the radio. Dispatch 347. Disregard the tow request. Situation resolved. Copy 347. Standby tow companies already en route. ETA 3 minutes. 3 minutes. The clock was still running. and then cutting through everything, the radio chatter, the crowd murmur, the desert heat, a voice that carried parade ground authority without being raised. Make a hole. The crowd parted. Colonel Grace Park walked through like she owned the ground she stepped on. 62 years old, 5'5", wearing her Marine Corps dress blue uniform with 3 rows of ribbons and the silver eagles of a full colonel catching the sun. Behind her came 2 more officers, a major and a captain also in dress blues, also moving with the kind of presence that made even experienced cops straighten their spines. Park stopped in front of Hector's van, rendered a perfect salute. Hector returned it, tears suddenly bright in his eyes. Park held the salute for a long beat, respect flowing both ways, then dropped her hand and turned to face Baylor. "Officer," she said, "I'm Colonel Grace Park, United States Marine Corps, retired. This man served under my command in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He's a decorated combat veteran with service-connected disabilities resulting from hostile action. Before this situation goes any further, I need you to cite the specific statute he's violated." Baylor opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Ma'am, I was investigating. I didn't ask what you were investigating. I asked what law he broke." Park's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath. "His vehicle is legally registered. His placard is current. He's parked in a designated accessible space. So tell me, what statute are you enforcing?" The tow truck rounded the corner, big yellow crane visible over the cars. Reyes stepped forward quickly. "Colonel, I'm Officer Reyes. I apologize for this situation. My partner made an error in judgment. The tow is being canceled." "Is it?" Park looked at the approaching truck. "Because it looks like it's still coming." The tow truck pulled up to the parking lot entrance driver, craning his neck to see what was happening. He took in the crowd, the patrol cars, the Marine officers in dress blues, and his expression shifted from professional boredom to serious concern. Williams appeared at Park's elbow, tablet in hand. "Colonel, I've documented the entire interaction. Witness statements, photos of permits, timestamp of the initial contact, and audio recording of Officer Baylor's statements, including—" She paused, glancing at Hector. Multiple derogatory terms directed at Mr. Ruiz regarding his disability. Park's expression didn't change, but something cold entered her eyes. "Multiple, yes ma'am, including wheelchair boy, at least twice suggestions that he was faking his disability and a demand that he prove his amputation status by physically displaying his prosthetics." Reyes actually took a step back, face going pale. The tow truck driver got out slowly, looking between the scene and his dispatch screen. I got a call for a silver-modified van this location." "You can leave," Park said, not looking away from Baylor. "The vehicle is legally parked." "Ma'am, I have to follow police orders." "Then you have a problem," Cruz said, moving to stand beside the truck. "Because if you hook that van, you're committing theft of modified medical equipment belonging to a disabled veteran, and we have 40 witnesses and 10 cameras that will testify to it in court. You want that lawsuit?" The driver looked at his dispatch screen again, looked at the crowd, looked at the Marine officers. "I'm calling my supervisor," he muttered, stepping away with his phone out. Baylor tried one more time. "This is still an active investigation. All of you are interfering. Stop talking." Reyes grabbed his arm, actually physically restraining her partner. "Trent, stop talking right now. We're leaving. We're going back to the station. You're going to write a report, and then you're going to talk to a union rep because this is going to internal affairs." "I didn't do anything. You called a disabled veteran wheelchair boy on camera," Reyes hissed. "You demanded he prove his disability. You called for a tow on a legally parked vehicle with visible permits. And you did it in front of 47 witnesses, including a JAG officer who's probably already drafting the civil rights complaint. We're done here." The tow truck driver came back, shaking his head. My supervisor says no way, not touching this. Sorry for the confusion. He got back in his truck and left crane arm rattling as he pulled away. Silence fell over the parking lot. Park looked down at Hector. Her expression softened slightly. You okay, Marine? Yes, ma'am. Thank you for coming. Always. She looked up at the assembled crowd. Thank you all. You showed up. You stood fast. That's what we do. Scattered applause, but quieter now. More reflective. Baylor stood frozen, Reyes's hand still on his arm, watching his authority drain away like water through a sieve. And Hector sat in his wheelchair, surrounded by brothers and sisters who'd dropped everything to answer a call and felt something he hadn't felt since Fallujah. The absolute certainty that he wasn't alone. Whatever came next, and something would definitely come next, he had his tribe. The patrol car's tail lights disappeared around the corner of the VA building, carrying Officer Baylor away from what should have been a routine power play and toward consequences he hadn't seen coming. Reyes drove her knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Baylor sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, like he could will the last 30 minutes out of existence. Back in the parking lot, the tension didn't dissolve so much as transform. The crisis had passed, but nobody moved to leave. There was a feeling in the air, part relief, part residual anger, part something else, something that felt like possibility. Colonel Park stood beside Hector's van, her dress blues drawing stares from civilians entering the VA for appointments. She'd removed her cover now, holding it tucked under one arm in that precise way that separated career military from people just wearing a uniform. Her eyes swept the assembled crowd, taking inventory, counting heads, assessing readiness the way she'd done 1,000 times before deployments. Master Sergeant Cruz, she said not loudly, but with the kind of projection that made everyone nearby turn to listen. Ma'am, Cruz snapped to attention without thinking about it. I need an accurate head count and contact information for everyone who responded. Can you coordinate that? Yes, ma'am. We've got 47 personnel on site. Most are already in the network from the initial alert. Good. Tell them I want to buy the first round at Murphy's Tavern at 1800 hours. Anyone who stood up today deserves a beer and a proper debrief. She paused, glancing at Hector. Unless our brother here needs medical attention first. Hector shook his head. I'm fine, Colonel. Appointment's not for another hour. Just needed a minute. He wasn't fine. You could see it in the way his hands still gripped the wheelchair armrests, in the careful control of his breathing, in the slight tremor he was trying to hide. Adrenaline crash, probably. The kind that hit after the shooting stopped when your body finally caught up to what had almost happened. Williams appeared at Park's elbow again, tablet cradled like a weapon. Colonel, permission to speak. Granted, Captain. Ma'am, I've compiled preliminary documentation. We have video evidence from 11 different angles, 17 written witness statements, photographs of the vehicle's permits, and registration and audio of the entire interaction, including Officer Baylor's specific statements. If Mr. Ruiz wants to pursue legal action, we have an airtight case for harassment, disability discrimination, and violation of civil rights under color of authority. Park's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Not quite satisfaction, more like recognition. You jag, Captain. Yes, ma'am. Army Reserve currently practicing civil rights law in Phoenix. I saw the alert and came straight from my office. Lucky timing. No such thing as luck, ma'am. Just good network security. Williams almost smiled. I've been on the stand to list since it started. When the call goes out, you respond. The stand to list. It had started informally 3 years ago, after a veteran in Tucson had been denied service at a restaurant because his service dog looked aggressive. Within 2 hours, 60 veterans had shown up to peacefully occupy every table in the place until the manager apologized and changed the policy. Word had spread. Other cities had created their own networks. Veterans active duty on leave reservists all connected through encrypted group texts and email chains ready to mobilize when one of their own faced harassment or discrimination. Hector hadn't known about the list until today. Hadn't known he was on it. The thought made his throat tight. Cruz was moving through the crowd now with military efficiency, collecting names and numbers on his phone, making sure everyone understood the 1800 meetup time. The gunny with the weathered face was coordinating departure order, making sure vehicles could actually get out of the parking lot without gridlock. The Lance Corporal with the professional camera rig was backing up footage to 3 different cloud services' chain of custody already in mind. This wasn't chaos. This was a unit executing a mission, even if the mission parameters had shifted from confrontation to documentation. A young corporal, maybe 25, still carrying the lean, hungry look of active duty, approached Hector's van hesitantly. His name tape read Morrison, and he wore a 3rd Battalion 5th Marines t-shirt that had seen better days. "Sergeant Ruiz." His voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry I don't know your rank." "Hector's fine son." Morrison swallowed hard. I wanted to say thank you for your service. And I'm sorry that happened to you. That cop was way out of line." Hector studied the kid for a moment, saw the barely healed scars on his forearms, the way he stood with most of his weight on his left leg, the slight tremor in his right hand. Combat wounds probably recent. The war was supposed to be winding down, but people were still getting chewed up. "You just get back?" Hector asked. 4 months ago. Helmand Province. IED got our convoy." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Lost my team leader. Lost my best friend. Got off lucky with some shrapnel and a concussion." "No such thing as lucky when you lose people." "No, sir. But I can still walk, so—" Morrison trailed off, realizing what he'd just said. His face went crimson. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean easy Marine." Hector's voice stayed gentle. "I know what you meant. And you're right, being able to walk is a gift. Don't waste it feeling guilty about it. Honor your fallen by living well. That's the mission now." Morrison's eyes went bright with unshed tears. He came to attention, rendered a sharp salute. Hector returned it, holding it long enough to matter, then dropped his hand. "You need anything, you call me," Hector said. "Cruz has my number. You need to talk. You need help with VA paperwork. You need someone to remind you why you're still here. You call. Understood?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Morrison walked away quickly, swiping at his eyes. Williams watched him go, then looked down at Hector with something like respect. "You just collected a battle buddy for life," she observed. "Kid needs one. They all do." Hector's voice went rough. "Coming home's harder than deploying. Nobody warns you about that part." Park had been watching the exchange from a few feet away. Now she stepped closer, crouching down so she was eye level with Hector, the way Williams had done earlier. Military courtesy. When you talked to someone in a wheelchair, you got down to their level. Showed respect through posture. "Hector," she said quietly. "What do you want to do about this? Ma'am, Officer Baylor, the department, this situation." Park's gaze was steady, assessing. "We can let it go. Write it off as one asshole cop having a bad day. Or we can push. File complaints, demand accountability. Make sure this doesn't happen to the next veteran who parks here. Your call. But if we push, it's going to get messy. Media attention, depositions, public scrutiny. I need to know you're ready for that before we commit." Hector was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the parking lot had started to clear slightly, as some of the veterans headed inside for their own appointments or back to jobs and families. But at least 20 remained talking in small groups, comparing stories, exchanging contact information. building connections that would outlast this morning's crisis. "I didn't want this," Hector said finally. "I just wanted to see my doctor about my prosthetics, get them adjusted. Maybe grab lunch at that taco place on McDowell on the way home. Simple day. I know. But if I let it go, if I just say no harm done, and move on, what happens to the next guy, the veteran who doesn't have a network to call, who doesn't have a colonel and a JAG officer and 40 Marines ready to show up? What happens when Baylor decides that guy is an easy target?" Park nodded slowly. "Then we make sure Baylor doesn't get another chance." "How?" "We document everything. Captain Williams files a formal complaint with Phoenix PD Internal Affairs. We request a meeting with the Chief of Police. We make it clear politely but firmly that this kind of harassment is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. And if necessary, we go public. Let the media tell the story of what happened here today." "The chief's not going to like that." "No," Park agreed. "But he's going to like the alternative even less. Viral video of his officer calling a disabled veteran wheelchair boy while trying to tow his legally parked vehicle. That's a PR nightmare. Better to get ahead of it, take responsibility, implement reforms. Smart leadership owns their mistakes before they become scandals." Williams was nodding, stylus already moving across her tablet. "I can have a formal complaint drafted by end of business today. Include all evidence witness statements and a preliminary analysis of policy violations. If we file it properly, Internal Affairs will have to investigate. They won't have a choice." "And if they try to bury it?" Cruz had rejoined the conversation, his expression skeptical. He'd seen too many investigations that went nowhere, too many complaints that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. "Then we escalate," Park said simply. "State Attorney General, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, ACLU. The news media loves stories about veterans being mistreated, especially when there's clear video evidence. We have leverage. We just need to be strategic about how we use it." Hector rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. "This is going to take over my life, isn't it? Meetings and interviews and depositions." "Probably," Park admitted. "For a few weeks, maybe a few months. It won't be fun. But Hector, you're not doing this alone. We're with you. Every step, every meeting, every deposition. You stood up this morning even when it was hard. Now we stand up for you." "Why?" The question came out quieter than Hector intended. "Why do you all care so much? Most of you don't even know me." Park's expression softened. "Because you're one of us. Because we took an oath to protect and defend, and that doesn't expire when you take off the uniform. Because every time we let something like this slide, we're saying it's okay to treat veterans like second-class citizens. And it's not okay. It's never okay." Cruz cleared his throat. "Also because Baylor's a dick who's been getting away with this crap for years, and it's about time someone called him on it." That got a surprised laugh from Hector, breaking the tension. "Fair point. So what's it going to be, Marine?" Park asked. "Stand down or stand up?" Hector looked around the parking lot, at the veterans who'd dropped everything to answer a call from someone most of them had never met. At Williams with her tablet full of evidence, at Cruz with his phone full of contact numbers, at Morrison lingering near his truck watching with hope in his eyes, like maybe the world could still be fair if people just fought hard enough. "We stand up," Hector said. "We make sure this doesn't happen again." Whereas Park smiled. Not a big smile, just a slight upturn at the corners of her mouth that carried approval and respect. "Outstanding. Captain Williams filed a complaint. Master Sergeant Cruz makes sure everyone who responded today gets a copy of the documentation for their records. I'm calling Chief Torres directly to request a meeting." "You have the chief's direct number." Cruz looked impressed. "I have everyone's direct number. You don't make colonel without knowing how to work a phone tree." Park stood replacing her cover with precise movements. "Hector, go to your appointment. Get your prosthetics adjusted. Live your life. We've got this." "Ma'am, that's an order, Sergeant. You've done your part. Now let us do ours." Hector wanted to argue, wanted to be part of the planning, the strategy, the fight. But his phantom limbs were aching, the ghost pain that haunted amputees, nerves screaming about injuries that no longer existed, and he was suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. Park rendered another salute. This time when Hector returned, his hand was steady. The crowd began to disperse for real, now veterans heading to vehicles, with promises to see each other at Murphy's Tavern later. Phone numbers were exchanged, social media connections made. The impromptu unit that had formed in response to crisis was transitioning into something more permanent, a network, a community, a battalion without uniforms, but with the same core mission: watch each other's backs. Cruz helped Hector deploy his wheelchair lift and get situated. "You good to drive?" "Yeah, just need a minute." "Take your time. I'll follow you in, make sure you get inside okay." "Diego, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Humor me." They made their way across the parking lot, Cruz walking beside the wheelchair at a casual pace. The VA entrance was maybe 100 yards away, but it felt longer today. Every person they passed seemed to be staring, though maybe that was just Hector's imagination. Word had probably spread inside about the confrontation. The VA was a small world, and gossip traveled fast. At the entrance, an older man in a Vietnam veteran cap held the door. The same man who'd been one of the first to stop and watch when Baylor had started his harassment. He nodded to Hector with something like solidarity. "Semper Fi, brother," he said quietly. "Semper Fi." Hector responded automatically, then caught himself. "You're Army, aren't you?" The man smiled. 101st Airborne, 1968 to 1970. But today, we're all Marines. Inside the VA was its usual controlled chaos. Veterans waiting for appointment, staff moving between offices, the particular smell of government buildings everywhere, industrial cleaner and old coffee and bureaucratic resignation. But there was an energy today, a buzz of conversation that stopped when Hector wheeled past. A nurse he recognized, Maria, who'd been helping him with his prosthetics adjustments for 2 years, rushed over. "Hector, oh my God, we heard what happened. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Maria. Just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding. That cop tried to tow your van. Jenny from the 2nd floor filmed the whole thing and posted it to the VA staff Facebook group. Everyone's furious." Hector blinked. "It's already on Facebook. Honey, it's on everything. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. Someone made a hashtag. Justice for Hector is trending locally." Maria pulled out her phone, showing him a screen full of angry comments and supportive messages. "You're famous." "I don't want to be famous. I want to get my prosthetics adjusted and go home." Maria's expression softened. "I know. Come on, Dr. Patel's ready for you. We'll get you fixed up." Cruz gripped Hector's shoulder briefly. "I'll be at Murphy's tonight. You come if you feel up to it. No pressure." "Thanks, Diego, for everything." "That's what brothers do." Cruz headed back toward the exit, already pulling out his phone to coordinate the next steps. The appointment took 90 minutes. Dr. Patel was thorough professional, and mercifully didn't mention the parking lot incident, even though he'd clearly heard about it. They adjusted the socket fit on Hector's right prosthetic, modified the alignment on his left, and scheduled a follow-up for 2 weeks out, normal, routine, exactly what Hector had wanted from this day. But when he wheeled back out to his van, the normalcy shattered. 2 news trucks were parked near the entrance. A reporter with a microphone and a camera operator spotted him immediately and started walking over with that particular stride that said, "Human interest story approaching." Mr. Ruiz, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 12 News. Do you have a moment to talk about what happened here this morning? Hector froze. This was real. This was happening. His face was going to be on the news. I really don't have a statement right now. We've obtained cell phone footage showing Phoenix police officer Trent Baylor attempting to have your vehicle towed from a legal parking space. Can you tell us what led to that confrontation? You'd have to ask Officer Baylor. We tried. Phoenix PD issued a statement saying the incident is under investigation and they can't comment on ongoing matters. But witnesses say the officer used derogatory language toward you regarding your disability. Is that accurate? Hector's hands tightened on the wheelchair controls. He wanted to say yes. Wanted to tell this reporter and her camera exactly what Baylor had said, exactly how it had felt to be humiliated in a parking lot full of fellow veterans. Wanted the world to know. But he also wanted to go home, wanted to have lunch, wanted to sit in his quiet living room with his dog and not think about badges or authority or the casual cruelty of people who should know better. I'm sorry, he said carefully. I really can't comment right now. My representatives will be issuing a statement later. Representatives. Like he had a team of lawyers and publicists instead of one JAG officer and a colonel who'd answered a desperate text message. Just one more question. Do you feel you were targeted because of your disability? Hector looked at the camera, at the red recording light, at the reporter with her microphone extended like a lifeline or a trap, he couldn't tell which. I feel, he said slowly, like I'm a veteran who wanted to see his doctor. And I feel like that should be the easiest thing in the world. But sometimes people in power forget that the uniform doesn't make you bulletproof, just makes you a better target. That's all I have to say. He wheeled away before she could ask another question, heading for his van with as much dignity as he could manage. Getting inside took longer than usual. His hands were shaking again, adrenaline surging even though the threat had passed hours ago. The drive home was a blur. Hector lived in a modest house in Glendale, 40 minutes from the VA if traffic cooperated. Today it didn't, but he barely noticed. His mind kept replaying the morning. Baylor's sneer. The moment he'd called for the tow. The sound of phones coming out, documenting his humiliation for posterity. And then the other moments. The cavalry arriving. Park in her dress blues. Cruz organizing the crowd. Williams collecting evidence. Morrison's tears. That Vietnam vet at the door saying, "We're all Marines." His phone buzzed constantly. Text messages flooding in. Some from people he knew, some from numbers he didn't recognize. All saying variations of the same thing. We saw, we're with you. You're not alone. At home, his dog, a German Shepherd mix named Gunner, greeted him with the kind of enthusiasm that made everything else seem manageable. Hector spent 10 minutes just sitting on the floor with Gunner, letting the dog lick his face and wag his entire back end with joy, grounding himself in something simple and true. His landline rang. Hector almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed a Phoenix area code he recognized. Hello? Mr. Ruiz, this is Chief Miguel Torres, Phoenix Police Department. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Hector's stomach dropped. Chief Torres. Yes. First, let me apologize. What happened to you this morning was completely unacceptable. Officer Baylor's behavior does not reflect the values or standards of this department, and I want you to know we're taking this matter very seriously. I appreciate that, Chief. I've already initiated an internal affairs investigation. Officer Baylor has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. I've also reviewed the video footage that's circulating, and I have to tell you it's damning. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment, especially against veterans. Torres sounded sincere. Hector wanted to believe him, but he'd heard promises before. Chief, with all respect, what happens if the investigation clears him? If Internal Affairs decides it was just a misunderstanding? There was a pause. Then Torres said quietly, Mr. Ruiz, I've been a cop for 28 years. I know what I saw in that video. This isn't going to be swept under the rug. But I also know that trust has to be earned, not demanded. So here's what I'm proposing. I'd like to meet with you and your representatives. Sit down face to face and talk about what happened and how we can prevent it from happening again. Not just for you, but for every veteran who comes to that VA. What kind of prevention? Training? Policy changes? Clear protocols for interactions with disabled individuals and veterans? Accountability measures? Whatever it takes. Torres paused again. I'm a veteran myself, Mr. Ruiz. Army 2 tours in Iraq. I know what that uniform costs, and I know that when you come home, you shouldn't have to fight your own police department for basic respect. Hector closed his eyes. Colonel Park mentioned wanting to meet with you. Grace Park, I know her. Worked with her on a task force a few years ago. She's tough as nails and doesn't suffer fools. If she's representing you, you've got good people in your corner. When do you want to meet? Tomorrow, if you're available. My office, 1400 hours. Bring whoever you want. This is a conversation, not an interrogation. I'll check with Colonel Park and get back to you. Thank you, Mr. Ruiz. And again, I'm sorry this happened. You deserved better. The call ended. Hector sat on his couch, Gunner's head in his lap, and tried to process. An apology from the chief of police. An investigation already started. A meeting scheduled. It was more than he'd expected, but also somehow not enough, because none of it changed what had happened. None of it erased Baylor's words, or the moment when Hector had felt truly powerless for the first time since Fallujah. His phone buzzed again. A text from Park meeting at 1800 still on. Need to brief everyone on next steps. Chief Torres called you yet? Hector typed back. Yes. Wants to meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. Your office or his. Shows we're willing to engage. I'll be there. Williams too. You good with that? Yes, ma'am. Good. Get some rest, Marine. Today was just the first battle. Hector stared at those words for a long time. The first battle. Meaning there would be more. Meaning this wasn't over, wasn't close to over. Meaning he'd just signed up for a new kind of war, one fought with lawyers and reporters and policy meetings instead of rifles and tactics. But as he sat there, phone lighting up with messages of support, Gunner warm against his legs, the sunlight streaming through his living room window, Hector realized something. He wasn't afraid. Tired. Yes. Overwhelmed, definitely. But not afraid. Because somewhere between that parking lot and this moment, he'd remembered what he'd learned in Fallujah. You don't have to be fearless to fight. You just have to believe the cause is worth it. And making sure no other veteran got called wheelchair boy by a cop who forgot what service meant. That was worth it. Murphy's Tavern sat on a corner in Tempe, the kind of dive bar that looked like it had survived 3 decades through sheer stubbornness and cheap beer. Neon signs flickered in the windows advertising brands nobody drank anymore, and the parking lot was more pothole than pavement. But it was veteran-owned, veteran-friendly, and most importantly, it had a back room that could hold 50 people when the occasion demanded. Tonight, it demanded. Hector arrived at 17:55 hours 5 minutes early, out of habit. Cruz met him at the door already nursing a beer and walked him inside without comment. The main bar area was busy with the usual Tuesday evening crowd, but Cruz led him past the pool tables and dartboards to a door marked Private Events in faded paint. Inside the room was packed. Not just the 47 who'd shown up at the VA, but more. Word had spread through the veteran network like wildfire, and people had come from across the valley. Some Hector recognized from previous VA appointments or VFW meetings. Others were complete strangers wearing unit patches and expressions that said they'd heard the story and wanted to be part of whatever came next. Colonel Park stood at the front of the room in civilian clothes, now jeans and a USMC polo, but her command presence was undiminished. She saw Hector enter and nodded once, then turned back to the conversation she was having with Williams and two men Hector didn't recognize. "Hector," Morrison appeared with a beer, pressing it into Hector's hand. "You came. I wasn't sure you would." Colonel Park said first round was on her. Couldn't miss that. Morrison grinned, but it faded quickly. "Seriously though, how are you holding up?" "That was intense this morning." "Still processing, honestly. Feels surreal." "Yeah." Morrison took a long pull from his own beer. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if we hadn't shown up. If you'd been alone." Hector had been thinking about that too. The tow truck hooking up his van. His independence dragged away on a chain. Days or weeks of bureaucratic hell trying to get it back, all because one cop had decided to flex his authority on someone he thought couldn't fight back. "But I wasn't alone," Hector said firmly. "You all showed up. That's what matters." Park's voice cut through the room noise. "All right, people, let's get started. Find a seat or a wall, but everyone listen up." The crowd settled quickly. Conversations dropping to silence with military efficiency. Hector found himself near the front, Morrison on one side and Cruz on the other, bracketed by Marines who'd appointed themselves his personal security detail without being asked. Park stood with her back to a wall covered in faded photographs of past events, her stance relaxed, but her eyes sharp. "First things first, thank you all for coming today, for responding to the call, for standing up, and for being here now. What happened this morning at the VA was unacceptable, but your response was outstanding. You showed discipline, courage, and exactly the kind of brotherhood we talk about but don't always live up to. I'm proud of every one of you." Scattered applause quickly dying as Park raised a hand. "That said, this is just the beginning. Captain Williams is going to brief you on the legal situation, then I'll talk about next steps. But before we get into that, I want to hear from Hector." She looked directly at him. "Your call, your fight. Everyone here needs to understand what you want out of this." Every head turned. Hector felt the weight of 60-plus sets of eyes and suddenly understood what Park was doing. This wasn't just a debrief. It was a commitment check. She was making sure everyone in this room knew they were signing up for something that could take months, could get ugly, could demand time and energy and emotional labor that nobody was obligated to give. Hector set down his beer and straightened in his wheelchair. "I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. I want Officer Baylor held accountable for what he did. And I want Phoenix PD to implement real changes, not just issue an apology and hope everyone forgets about it in a week." "That's going to require sustained pressure," Park said. "Media attention, legal action, public advocacy. It's going to get uncomfortable. You'll be in the spotlight. People will have opinions about you, about what happened, about whether you're making too big a deal out of it. Are you ready for that?" Hector thought about the news cameras waiting at the VA, about Chief Torres's phone call, about the hashtag Maria had shown him. His face was already out there, his story already spreading beyond his control. "No," he admitted. "I'm not ready. But I'm willing. There's a difference." Park's expression softened slightly, approval flickering across her face. "That's all any of us can ask. All right, Captain Williams, walk us through the legal situation." Williams stepped forward, tablet in hand, but speaking from memory. "We filed a formal complaint with Phoenix PD Internal Affairs at 16:30 hours today. The complaint alleges harassment discrimination under the ADA deprivation of rights under color of authority and violation of departmental policy. We included video evidence from 11 sources, 17 witness statements, photographs of the vehicle and permits, and a detailed timeline of events. Someone in the back called out, "What's the PD's response?" Officially, they're investigating and can't comment on ongoing matters. Unofficially, Chief Torres called Mr. Ruiz directly to apologize and request a meeting. Officer Baylor has been placed on administrative leave. That's faster action than I expected, which suggests they're taking this seriously. Or covering their asses before it goes viral, Cruz muttered. Probably both, Williams agreed. The meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 1400 hours. Chief Torres representatives from Internal Affairs and possibly the city attorney will be present. We'll be presenting our documentation and demanding specific reforms. What kind of reforms? Another voice asked. Training protocols for interactions with disabled individuals and veterans. Clear disciplinary guidelines for officers who engage in harassment or discrimination. A formal review process for complaints involving vulnerable populations. And we're pushing for what we're calling the Ruiz Protocol, a specific set of procedures that officers must follow when dealing with accessible parking enforcement. A woman near the middle of the room raised her hand. What happens if they say no, if they blow you off, or offer some weak-ass sensitivity training and call it a day? Then we escalate, Park said. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, ACLU. Media pressure. We make this a public referendum on how Phoenix treats its veterans, and if necessary, we file a federal civil rights lawsuit. She paused. But litigation takes years and costs money we don't have. The goal is to get meaningful reform through negotiation and public pressure, not through the courts. Williams nodded. We're also coordinating with veteran advocacy groups statewide. If Phoenix implements real reforms, we want other cities to follow. Make this a statewide standard, not just one department's policy. Hector listened, trying to absorb the magnitude of what they were proposing. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every veteran in Arizona, every disabled person who'd ever been hassled by a cop who didn't understand or didn't care about accessibility laws. "What do you need from us?" Morrison asked. "The people in this room, I mean. How do we help?" Park smiled. "Excellent question. First, everyone who witnessed the incident today needs to be prepared to give formal statements if this goes to a hearing or deposition. Second, we need bodies at the meeting tomorrow. Not everyone, but enough to show the chief that this isn't 3 or 4 angry people. It's a community that gives a damn. Third, we need you to spread the word. Talk to your units, your VFW posts, your American Legion chapters. Build support. Make sure every veteran in the valley knows what happened and knows we're fighting back. And fourth, Williams added, we need documentation. If any of you have had negative interactions with Phoenix PD, especially involving disability or veteran status, we want to know. Build a pattern. Show this isn't an isolated incident." The room erupted in conversation. People pulling out phones, comparing stories, swapping contact information. Hector heard fragments of other encounters. Cops questioning the legitimacy of service dogs, harassment at traffic stops, dismissive attitudes toward PTSD, or visible injuries. Each story was different, but the thread running through them was the same people in authority treating veterans like problems to be managed rather than citizens to be served. Cruz leaned over to Hector. "You okay? This is getting big fast." "Yeah, I didn't think it would be like this. I thought maybe we'd file a complaint, maybe get an apology, and that would be it." "Nothing's ever that simple when you're dealing with systemic problems," Cruz said. "Baylor's not the disease, he's a symptom. The disease is a culture that lets cops like him get away with this shit for years because nobody wants to rock the boat." A heavy-set man with a Salt River Pima tribal tattoo on his forearm approached, beer in hand. "Hector Ruiz. I'm Thomas Begay, Army National Guard. I was at the VA this morning, saw the whole thing. Wanted to shake your hand." Hector extended his hand, and Begay gripped it firmly. That took balls standing up to that cop, Begay said. A lot of people would have just taken it, tried to avoid trouble. I didn't really have a choice. He was going to tow my van. You had a choice about how you handled it. You stayed calm, stayed respectful, didn't give him an excuse to escalate. That's discipline. That's leadership. Begay paused. I'm telling my whole unit about this. We've got maybe 30 guys who come to this VA regularly. They need to know what happened, need to know we're standing up. I appreciate that. And if you need anything, rides to appointments, help with paperwork, whatever you call me. We take care of our own. Begay handed over a business card, then moved back into the crowd. The next hour was a blur of conversations. Veterans introducing themselves, sharing their own stories, offering support. An older woman, whose son had been killed in Afghanistan, now volunteering with Gold Star families. A young corporal, who'd lost his leg to an IED and was navigating the VA system for the first time. A grizzled sergeant major who'd served in Desert Storm and Vietnam and had seen enough injustice to fill a library. Each conversation was its own weight, its own reminder that Hector's story had become part of something larger. A collective narrative of service and sacrifice, and the bitter reality that coming home didn't mean the fight was over. Park eventually pulled him aside, guiding him to a quieter corner of the room. Williams joined them, tablet balanced on one arm. How are you really doing? Park asked, dropping the command voice for something gentler. Overwhelmed, Hector admitted. This morning I was just a guy trying to see his doctor. Now I'm apparently the face of some kind of movement. You don't have to be, Park said. We can dial this back. Handle it quietly, work behind the scenes, keep your name out of it. Can we? It's already on social media. The news stations have my face. That hashtag Maria showed me has thousands of posts. Williams pulled up her tablet. Actually, it's over 50,000 posts now. Hatcher Justice for Hector has gone regional. News outlets in California and Nevada have picked up the story. Someone made a petition on change.org demanding reforms. It's got 12,000 signatures in 8 hours. Hector stared at the screen, watching the numbers tick upward in real time. 12,000 people he'd never met, would never meet, had signed their names to demand justice for something that happened to him. I don't understand, he said quietly. Why do they care? Most of them probably aren't even veterans. Because your story touches something universal, Williams said. It's not just about veterans or disability rights. It's about bullies with badges. It's about standing up to authority when authority is wrong. It's about community coming together to protect the vulnerable. That resonates with people. Park nodded. You've become a symbol, Hector, whether you wanted to or not. The question is whether you're willing to carry that responsibility or if we find someone else to be the public face while you stay in the background. Hector was quiet for a long moment, watching the crowd of veterans still networking and comparing stories. He thought about Morrison, barely 25, and already carrying survivor's guilt. About Begay offering help without being asked. About that Vietnam vet at the VA entrance saying, "We're all Marines." I'll do it, he said, but I need help. I don't know how to talk to media or give speeches or any of that. We'll teach you, Park said, and you won't be alone. Every interview, every meeting, every public appearance will be right there. What about Chief Torres tomorrow? What do I say? Williams flipped through her tablet. We'll prep you tonight and again in the morning. But the key points are simple. Acknowledge his apology, express hope for genuine reform, and make it clear we're watching. Be respectful but firm. Don't let them minimize what happened or treat it as an isolated incident. And if he offers something weak, token reforms that don't actually change anything, we say thank you, but no thank you, Park said. And we go to the media with a statement about how the department isn't taking this seriously. Public pressure works, but only if we're willing to use it. Cruz appeared with 3 fresh beers. Hate to interrupt the strategy session, but people are asking if Hector wants to say a few words. No pressure, but they came here to support you. Might be good to acknowledge that. Hector's stomach clenched. Public speaking wasn't his strong suit. Never had been. He was a doer, not a talker. Let him fix an engine, or plan a mission, or carry a wounded Marine, and he was fine. But standing in front of a crowd with everyone watching, I don't know what to say. Say thank you, Park suggested. Say you appreciate their support. Say you're committed to fighting for real change. That's it. Doesn't have to be fancy. Hector drained half his beer in one long pull, then nodded. All right, let's do it before I change my mind. Cruz whistled sharply, and the room fell silent with the same military efficiency as before. Hector wants to say a few words. The crowd parted, creating a path to the front of the room. Hector wheeled forward, heart-hammering, trying to remember the last time he'd felt this nervous. Maybe his first combat patrol in Fallujah. Maybe never. He looked out at the sea of faces. Veterans of every age, every conflict, every branch. Some wearing unit patches, some in plain clothes, all watching him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to sympathy to fierce determination. I'm not good at speeches, he started, and a few people chuckled. But I wanted to say thank you. This morning when that cop called for the tow truck, I felt helpless. I've survived IEDs and firefights and 18 months of learning to walk again, but sitting in that parking lot, I felt like I was back to being nobody. Just another broken veteran who couldn't protect himself. The room was silent now, the kind of silence that meant people were actually listening. Then you all showed up. You dropped what you were doing, drove across the city, stood up for someone most of you didn't even know. And you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. His voice caught slightly. That I'm not alone. That we're not alone. That the uniform might come off, but the bond doesn't break. Someone in the back said, "Oorah," quietly, and it rippled through the room like a prayer. So thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for standing fast. Thank you for reminding me what brotherhood really means. Hector paused, gathering himself. Tomorrow we meet with Chief Torres. Then we keep fighting until things change. Not just for me, but for every veteran who comes after us. Because this isn't about one parking space or one bad cop. It's about whether we're going to accept being treated like second-class citizens, or whether we're going to demand the respect we earned. The room erupted in applause, boots stomping on worn floorboards, voices raised in approval. Park was smiling. Williams was nodding. Cruz was actually wiping his eyes. Morrison pushed through the crowd and wrapped Hector in a fierce hug that nearly toppled the wheelchair. That was perfect, man. That was exactly what we needed to hear. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of conversation and planning. Park organized a volunteer schedule for the meeting tomorrow, making sure they'd have enough bodies present to make an impact without overwhelming the chief's office. Williams collected contact information from anyone willing to provide formal statements. Cruz set up a private Facebook group for coordination and updates. By 2100 hours, people started filtering out, heading home to families and jobs and obligations. But they all stopped to shake Hector's hand or grip his shoulder, each one carrying the same message: we're with you. Hector finally made it to his van around 21:30, exhausted but strangely energized. Cruz walked him out, scanning the parking lot with the same tactical awareness he'd probably carried since Afghanistan. "You good to drive?" Cruz asked. "Yeah, just tired." "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense." "Diego." Hector paused before deploying the wheelchair lift. "Why'd you come this morning to the VA, I mean? You didn't know me that well." Cruz was quiet for a moment, looking up at the night sky. 3 years ago, I was at a restaurant with my family. My daughter was having a PTSD episode, bad one, panic attack, the works. Manager told us to leave, said we were disturbing other customers, made a scene, called us dramatic, suggested I was faking the PTSD for sympathy. His jaw tightened. I was ready to break his teeth, but then this old Marine, had to be 70 at least, stood up from his table and just started singing the Marine Corps hymn, right there in the middle of this Applebee's. Then another vet joined in, then another. Within 2 minutes, half the restaurant was singing, and that manager was backpedaling so fast he nearly tripped. What happened? Cops came, took statements. Marines who'd been there gave their contact info, said they'd testify if I wanted to file a complaint. Manager got fired. Restaurant corporate sent my family a formal apology and vouchers. Cruz looked at Hector. That old Marine. He waited until we left, followed us to the parking lot, and just said, "Take care of your daughter, son. We've got your back." Then he drove away. I never even got his name. So, when you saw the alert this morning, I remembered how it felt to not be alone, how it felt to have brothers show up when you needed them. Cruz extended his hand. That's why I came, Hector, because somebody did it for me once. They shook hands, the grip lasting a moment longer than necessary. Then Cruz headed to his truck. Hector watched him go, then looked around the parking lot at the remaining vehicles. Each one represented a person who'd answered the call. Each one was a reminder that the tribe was real, was strong, was ready. The drive home was quieter than the drive to Murphy's. Hector's mind kept replaying the evening Morrison's hug, Begay's handshake, the applause after his speech. He'd spent 3 years since Fallujah feeling like his service was over, like he'd given everything he had, and now existed in some kind of holding pattern, waiting for the next prosthetics adjustment or VA appointment. But tonight, he felt purpose again. Not the same purpose as carrying wounded Marines through hostile streets, but something just as important. Fighting for the people who came after him, making sure the next veteran didn't have to face what he'd faced alone. His phone rang as he pulled into his driveway. Unknown number, but he answered anyway. Mr. Ruiz. This is Detective Sarah Chen with Phoenix PD Internal Affairs. I'm heading up the investigation into today's incident. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Hector's exhaustion evaporated. Yes, ma'am. First, I want you to know this is a courtesy call. You're under no obligation to speak with me without your attorney present. Captain Williams has already been in touch, and she's welcome to join any formal interview. But I wanted to reach out personally to let you know we're taking this very seriously. I appreciate that, Detective. I've reviewed the video footage and witness statements. I've also pulled Officer Baylor's personnel file and disciplinary history. She paused. Mr. Ruiz, there's a pattern here. This isn't the first complaint against Officer Baylor involving aggressive behavior toward vulnerable populations. It's the fifth. 5 other people who'd faced Baylor's cruelty and filed complaints. How many more hadn't filed, just accepted it and moved on? What happened to the other complaints? 3 were deemed unsubstantiated due to lack of evidence. 1 resulted in a written reprimand. 1 is still pending from 2 months ago, homeless veteran claiming Baylor destroyed his belongings during a camping sweep. Chen's voice hardened. The difference with your case is documentation. We have clear video from multiple angles, multiple credible witnesses, and a textbook example of disability discrimination. This one won't be swept away. What happens next? Formal investigation, probably 2 to 3 weeks. We'll interview everyone involved, review all evidence, and compile a report. That report goes to the Chief and the Civilian Review Board. Based on what I've seen so far, I'll be recommending termination and referral to the county attorney for possible criminal charges. Hector gripped the phone tighter. Criminal charges. Deprivation of rights under color of authority is a federal crime. What Officer Baylor did attempting to impound your legally parked vehicle while making discriminatory statements about your disability potentially meets that standard. I can't promise anything, but I'll be making the recommendation. Detective, I don't want to ruin his life. I just want him to never do this to anyone else. I understand that, Mr. Ruiz, and your compassion speaks well of you. But Officer Baylor made choices today. He chose to harass a disabled veteran. He chose to call for a tow despite clear evidence of legal parking. He chose to use derogatory language on camera. Those choices have consequences. She paused. Get some rest. We'll be in touch about scheduling a formal interview. And Mr. Ruiz, thank you for your service. The call ended. Hector sat in his van in the darkness of his driveway, Gunner barking excitedly from inside the house, and tried to process. Criminal charges, termination, federal investigation. This had escalated beyond anything he'd imagined when he'd called Colonel Park for help. But as he finally made his way inside Fed Gunner and collapsed onto his couch, Hector realized something important. He didn't regret it. Not the call, not the confrontation, not the decision to fight back. Because somewhere in Phoenix tonight, there was another veteran parking at that VA, and tomorrow, and the day after. And each one deserved to do so without fear, without harassment, without some badge-heavy cop deciding they were an easy target. If making sure that happened meant his face on the news and meetings with chiefs and months of legal wrangling, then that's what it cost. Hector had paid worse prices for less important victories. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from Park, proud of you, Marine. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we show them what accountability looks like. Hector read it twice, then set his phone aside and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would come, whether he was ready or not. But tonight, for the first time since Fallujah, he felt like he was fighting for something that mattered. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone. The Phoenix Police Department headquarters sat on Washington Street like a concrete fortress, all sharp angles and tinted windows that reflected the midday sun into blinding sheets of light. Hector arrived at 1330 hours 30 minutes early because Marines didn't do late, even to meetings they dreaded. Colonel Park was already there standing beside her truck in full dress blues again. The uniform was a statement, a reminder to everyone who saw it that this wasn't just some civilian complaint. This was about how the city treated its veterans. Morning, Hector. Park's handshake was firm, steadying. You ready? As ready as I'll ever be. Williams is inside already setting up. Cruz and about 15 others are in the public waiting area. We kept the numbers manageable like Torres requested, but visible enough to make the point. Hector nodded, scanning the parking lot. 2 news vans were parked across the street, cameras trained on the building entrance. A small group of protesters held signs reading, "Justice for Veterans," and "Badge doesn't mean bully." One woman had brought her son in his army uniform, both of them standing silent vigil. "Media's already here," Hector observed. "Good. Let them see us walk in together. Let them see we're organized, professional, and not going away." Park adjusted her cover. "Remember what we talked about. Be respectful but firm. Don't let them minimize what happened. Don't accept empty promises. And if something feels wrong, look at me. I'll handle it." They made their way across the parking lot, Hector's wheelchair, navigating the slight incline with practiced ease. A reporter called out questions that Park ignored with the kind of disciplined silence that came from decades of dealing with media. The building's automatic doors opened, and the blast of air conditioning was a relief after even the short time in the heat. Inside the lobby was sterile and bureaucratic vinyl chairs bolted to the floor, informational posters about crime prevention, a reception desk staffed by a young officer who looked up nervously as they entered. Crews materialized from the waiting area, along with Morrison Begay and a dozen others. They'd followed instructions, dressing respectfully. No aggressive slogans, no confrontational body language. Just veterans in their civvies quietly present impossible to ignore. "Chief Torres's office is on the 3rd floor," the desk officer said. "Officer Reyes will escort you up." Janet Reyes appeared from a side hallway, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes carrying something that might have been sympathy. "Colonel Park, Mr. Ruiz, if you'll follow me." The elevator ride was silent, except for the mechanical hum. Reyes kept her gaze forward, jaw tight. She'd been Baylor's partner, had witnessed his behavior, had stopped him from making it worse. Hector wondered what that cost her, whether she'd face blowback for not backing her partner's play. The 3rd floor was quieter than the lobby-carpeted hallways lined with offices bearing nameplates and unit designations. Reyes led them to a conference room where Williams was already set up her laptop connected to a projection screen, documents organized in neat stacks. "Colonel Hector." Williams stood shaking hands. "Chief Torres will be here in 5 minutes. He's bringing Deputy Chief Morrison, the head of Internal Affairs, and the city attorney. I've loaded all our evidence onto the presentation system. We're ready." Park surveyed the room with tactical assessment. Large conference table, 12 chairs, windows overlooking the street where protesters and media had gathered. "Good sight lines. They'll be able to see the crowd from here. That works in our favor." Hector positioned himself at the table, Park on his right, Williams on his left, a show of solidarity, of strength. The door opened, and Cruz slipped in quietly, taking a position against the back wall without being invited. Reyes started to object, then seemed to think better of it and simply left. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Hector's phantom limbs ached the ghost pain that stress always triggered. He focused on his breathing, on the techniques his VA therapist had taught him. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. Combat breathing, they called it. Funny how the skills learned for war applied to everything else. At exactly 1400 hours, the door opened. Chief Miguel Torres entered first, and Hector immediately understood why he'd risen to his position. The man carried authority without arrogance, his uniform crisp, his bearing confident, but not cocky. Maybe 50 years old, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that looked tired but alert. Behind him came 3 others, a woman in her 40s with deputy chief stars, an older man in civilian clothes who had to be internal affairs, and a younger woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase that screamed city attorney. "Colonel Park." Torres extended his hand. "Thank you for coming, Chief Torres." Park's handshake was professional. "You remember Captain Sarah Williams from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, and this is Gunnery Sergeant Hector Ruiz, USMC, retired." Torres turned to Hector, and something shifted in his expression. He came to attention and rendered a salute. "Sergeant Ruiz, thank you for your service." Hector returned the salute, caught off guard by the gesture. "Thank you, Chief. Please, everyone sit." Torres took a chair across from them while his team flanked him. "Let me introduce Deputy Chief Angela Morrison, head of our Professional Standards Division, Lieutenant Frank Chen, Internal Affairs, and Rebecca Walsh, Assistant City Attorney." Introductions completed, an uncomfortable silence fell. Torres broke it first. "Sergeant Ruiz, I want to start by apologizing again for what happened to you yesterday. What you experienced was completely unacceptable and does not reflect the values or standards of this department. I'm deeply sorry." "I appreciate that, Chief," Hector said carefully. "But I'm more interested in making sure it doesn't happen again. To anyone." "Agreed. That's why we're here." Torres nodded to Lieutenant Chen. Frank, can you brief everyone on the investigation status? Chen opened a folder, his expression grim. We've conducted preliminary interviews with Officer Baylor, his partner, Officer Reyes, and 3 witnesses from the scene. We've also reviewed video footage from multiple sources. Based on initial findings, Officer Baylor violated department policy in several areas: improper enforcement action, discriminatory language toward a disabled individual, failure to properly assess parking compliance, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Initial findings, Williams said quietly. What does that mean in terms of timeline? Full investigation will take 2 to 3 weeks. Officer Baylor remains on administrative leave. Once complete, the case goes to a disciplinary board for final determination. And the other complaints? Park's voice was sharp. Detective Chen called Sergeant Ruiz last night and mentioned this was Officer Baylor's 5th complaint involving aggressive behavior toward vulnerable populations. What happened with those? An uncomfortable pause. Deputy Chief Morrison shifted in her seat. Those complaints were investigated according to protocol. Some were unsubstantiated, others resulted in corrective action. Corrective action, Cruz said from the back wall. Everyone turned. What kind of corrective action? Because from where I'm standing, Baylor kept his badge, kept his authority, and kept right on harassing people until he picked the wrong target. Torres held up a hand. Master Sergeant Cruz, is it? Yes, sir. You're right. And that's on us. On me. Torres's expression hardened. I've been chief for 3 years. Officer Baylor's pattern predates my tenure, but that's not an excuse. The system failed. We failed. And I'm committed to fixing it. How? Hector asked. What specific changes are you proposing? Walsh, the city attorney, started to speak, but Torres cut her off with a gesture. I'm going to be blunt because I think you deserve transparency. The city is concerned about liability. They want to settle this quietly, offer you compensation, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and move on. I told them that's not going to work because this isn't about money. It's about institutional change. Am I right? Hector glanced at Park, who nodded slightly. You're right, Chief. I don't want money. I want to make sure the next veteran who parks at that VA doesn't face what I faced. Then here's what I'm proposing. Torres pulled out a document, sliding it across the table. The Ruiz Protocol, named after you, if you'll allow it. A comprehensive set of procedures for how Phoenix PD officers interact with disabled individuals, veterans, and accessible parking enforcement. Williams pulled the document closer, scanning quickly. Her eyebrows rose. This is actually substantive. Mandatory training, clear escalation procedures, documentation requirements, civilian oversight. It's a first draft, Torres admitted. But I want your input. I want you to help us get this right. Because you're the experts on what veterans need, what disabled individuals face, what accountability looks like. Park leaned forward, studying Torres's face. This is more than I expected, Chief. Why go this far? Torres was quiet for a moment, then pulled up his left sleeve. A prosthetic hand, sophisticated and realistic, but unmistakably artificial. IED in Mosul, 2005. Army Rangers. I got out, went to college on the GI Bill, joined Phoenix PD because I wanted to serve a different way. I know what it's like to navigate the world with a disability. I know what it's like to have people look at you and see weakness instead of strength, and I know that badge on my chest means I have a responsibility to do better. The room went silent. Even Walsh, the city attorney, looked stunned. So yes, Torres continued. I'm pushing for real reform. Not because I'm worried about lawsuits, though. The city attorney definitely is, but because it's the right thing to do. Officer Baylor is one symptom of a larger cultural problem. We fix the culture, we prevent the next Baylor. Hector felt something shift in his chest. He'd expected bureaucratic resistance, empty promises, maybe a token apology. Not this. Not a police chief who understood on a personal level what yesterday's parking lot had meant. "What's the timeline?" Williams asked, already making notes on her tablet. Morrison spoke up. "We can implement preliminary training within 2 weeks. Full protocol rollout in 60 days. Civilian Oversight Committee established within 90 days. Officer Baylor's disciplinary hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. And if he's found guilty, termination," Torres said flatly. "No negotiation, no resignation in lieu of firing. Terminated for cause, which means he can't just go to another department and start over." Cruz whistled softly from the back. "That's more than most departments would do." "Most departments don't have a chief who's been where Sergeant Ruiz has been," Torres said. "I'm not doing him any favors. I'm doing my job." Park drummed her fingers on the table, thinking. "We need guarantees. Something in writing that commits the department to these reforms beyond your tenure as chief. Because no offense, but administrations change. I need to know this protocol will survive past your watch." "That's where I come in," Walsh said, finally finding her voice. "I can draft an ordinance for City Council. Make the Ruiz Protocol city law, not just department policy. That makes it enforceable and permanent. How long? City Council meets monthly. I can have a draft ordinance ready for the next session 3 weeks. Vote within 60 days, assuming it gets through committee." Williams was already calculating. "That's aggressive, but doable. We'd need to mobilize community support, pack the council meetings, make sure they understand the public is watching." "We can do that," Park said. "The network that showed up yesterday, that was 47 people responding to one text message. We can fill that council chamber." Torres nodded. "Then we have a path forward. Immediate reforms within the department, long-term protections through city ordinance, and Officer Baylor's termination pending the disciplinary hearing. Does that address your concerns?" Hector looked at Park, then at Williams. Both women gave slight nods. "It's a start," he said. "But I want to be clear, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to monitor implementation, attend the disciplinary hearing, track outcomes. This isn't a handshake and goodbye." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Torres said. "In fact, I'm counting on it. Accountability works both ways. You hold us to our promises, we demonstrate we're serious about change. Everyone wins." Morrison cleared her throat. "There's one other matter. The tow company. They were responding to an officer's call, but their driver showed good judgment in refusing to hook the vehicle once the situation became clear. I've already contacted their management. They're offering to provide a full detailing service for Sergeant Ruiz's van, no charge, as an apology for any distress caused. And they're donating $5,000 to the Phoenix VA for accessibility improvements," Torres added. "Wheelchair ramps, automatic door openers, that kind of thing. Their idea, not ours." And Begay appeared in the doorway. Someone must have texted him carrying a folder. "Colonel, sorry to interrupt. Media's asking for a statement. We've got reporters from all 4 local networks, plus CNN and Fox downstairs." Torres's eyebrows rose. "CNN? This went national." "Video hit Twitter last night," Cruz said. 3 million views and counting. Everyone from veterans groups to disability rights organizations is weighing in. You're on the news whether you want to be or not." Torres looked at Hector. "With your permission, I'd like us to give a joint statement. Show we're working together, not adversaries. Show Phoenix that we're committed to getting this right." Hector's stomach clenched. National news. Cameras. His face broadcast to millions of people. Everything he'd never wanted. But he thought about Morrison in the parking lot yesterday, tears in his eyes, asking how to help. About Begay offering rides without being asked. About that Vietnam vet saying we're all Marines. About Detective Chen on the phone last night talking about patterns and accountability. "Okay," he said, "but I want Colonel Park and Captain Williams with me, and I want to make it clear this isn't over until we see real change." "Deal." Torres stood extending his hand. Shall we go show them what accountability looks like? The walk down to the lobby felt surreal. Torres and his command staff, Park and Williams in their uniforms, Hector in his wheelchair flanked by Marines who'd become his honor guard. They emerged from the elevator to find the lobby packed, not just the 15 veterans who'd come as support, but more who'd showed up when word spread. Easily 40 people now lining the walls, standing at attention. Outside, the media presence had tripled. Reporters jockeyed for position cameras mounted on shoulders, microphones extended. The protesters had grown to maybe 50 people, now holding signs and watching with expressions that mixed hope and skepticism. Torres stepped up to a hastily arranged podium bearing the Phoenix PD seal. Hector positioned himself to Torres's left, Park to his right, a visual representation of partnership. Good afternoon. I'm Chief Miguel Torres, Phoenix Police Department. Yesterday morning, an incident occurred at the VA Medical Center that was unacceptable and does not reflect the values of this department. Gunnery Sergeant Hector Ruiz, a decorated Marine veteran and double amputee, was harassed by one of our officers while legally parked in an accessible space. The officer used derogatory language, attempted to have Sergeant Ruiz's vehicle towed without cause, and created a situation that was both humiliating and dangerous. The cameras flashed reporters' scribbled notes. Torres didn't flinch. I want to be clear, this was not a miscommunication. This was not a good officer having a bad day. This was a violation of policy, a violation of law, and a violation of the trust our community places in us. Officer Trent Baylor has been placed on administrative leave. A full investigation is underway, and based on initial findings, I expect that investigation will result in termination and potential criminal charges. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Criminal charges against a cop were rare. Everyone knew it. But terminating one officer isn't enough. We're implementing comprehensive reforms that we're calling the Ruiz Protocol procedures, designed to ensure this never happens again. These reforms include mandatory training on disability rights and veteran interactions, clear escalation procedures for accessible parking enforcement, civilian oversight, and accountability measures that will outlast my tenure as chief. Torres paused, looking directly at the cameras. The city attorney is drafting an ordinance to make these reforms permanent city law. We expect it to be before City Council within 3 weeks, and I'm inviting Sergeant Ruiz, Colonel Grace Park, and their team to help us develop these protocols. Because they're the experts. They know what veterans and disabled citizens need, and we're going to listen. He stepped back from the podium, gesturing to Hector. Sergeant Ruiz has something to say. Hector wheeled forward, every instinct screaming at him to retreat. But 40 veterans stood at attention behind him. Park's hand rested briefly on his shoulder. And somewhere out there, veterans were watching, wondering if this would be another empty promise or the start of real change. My name is Hector Ruiz, he said, voice carrying despite the tremor. Yesterday I went to the VA for a prosthetics appointment. I was legally parked with visible permits, but Officer Baylor decided I was an easy target. He called me wheelchair boy. He suggested I was faking my disability. He ordered a tow for my legally parked van, and he did it with contempt that made it clear he saw my service not as sacrifice, but as inconvenience. The crowd was dead silent. I served 3 tours in Iraq, lost both legs below the knee to an IED in Fallujah, spent 18 months learning to walk again, and I came home thinking the fight was over. But yesterday showed me something: the fight's never over. It just changes form. We stop fighting enemies overseas and start fighting to be treated with basic dignity in our own country. Hector paused, gathering himself. Chief Torres has promised reforms, real reforms, the kind that make a difference, and I appreciate that. But I want to be clear to everyone watching: promises are easy. Follow through is hard. So we're going to be here, monitoring, attending meetings, holding them accountable. Because the next veteran who parks at that VA deserves better than what I got. And if we have to fight for that respect, then that's what we'll do. He looked up at Torres. But I also want to thank the chief for hearing us, for understanding what yesterday meant, for being willing to do the hard work of real change instead of the easy work of public relations. I'm cautiously hopeful, and I'm ready to work together to get this right. The applause started with the veterans in the lobby, slow, deliberate clapping that built into something powerful. Then the protesters outside joined in. Even some of the reporters were nodding approval. Torres stepped back to the podium. We'll take a few questions. The media erupted. Hands shot up, voices overlapping. Torres pointed to a reporter from Channel 12. Chief, you mentioned potential criminal charges against Officer Baylor. Can you elaborate? That decision rests with the county attorney's office and potentially federal prosecutors. Deprivation of rights under color of authority is a federal offense. We're forwarding our findings to appropriate authorities. Another reporter, Sergeant Ruiz. Are you considering a civil lawsuit? Hector shook his head. This isn't about money. It's about change. If the department follows through on these reforms, that's all I want. Colonel Park, you organized the response yesterday. Are you planning similar actions if reforms don't materialize? Park's expression was steel. The network that responded yesterday remains ready and vigilant. We hope cooperation works, but we're prepared to escalate if necessary. Veterans protect each other. That doesn't stop just because we're home. The questions continued for 20 minutes. Torres handled the political ones, Hector the personal ones, Park the strategic ones. They worked together smoothly, presenting a united front that was more powerful than any individual statement. Finally, Torres called an end to the press conference. As the crowd began to disperse, a young officer approached Hector hesitantly. His name tag read Davidson, and he couldn't have been more than 25. Sergeant Ruiz, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened to you. And I promise not all of us are like Baylor. Hector studied the kid's earnest face. I know that, son. Officer Reyes showed that yesterday, when she stopped her partner from making it worse. You show it by how you treat people every day, by remembering that badge is a responsibility, not a weapon. Davidson nodded, eyes bright. Yes, sir. I won't forget. As they made their way back to the parking lot, surrounded by veterans who'd become brothers in a single day, Hector felt the weight of what they'd accomplished beginning to sink in. They'd forced a meeting with the chief, gotten concrete commitments, put reforms in motion that could change how an entire city treated its veterans and disabled citizens. But they'd also made themselves visible, made themselves targets for anyone who thought they were making too much noise, demanding too much change. The backlash would come. It always did. Torres caught up to them at Park's truck. Sergeant Ruiz, Colonel, one more thing. I'd like you to speak at the first training session. Share your story with our officers. Help them understand what it feels like from your perspective. Hector's first instinct was to refuse. Standing in front of a room full of cops, reliving yesterday's humiliation for an audience, the thought made him sick. But then he remembered Morrison, Davidson, even Reyes, who'd stopped her partner despite the professional cost. Good cops existed. They just needed to understand why yesterday mattered. I'll do it, Hector said. But I want other veterans there too. Different branches, different disabilities, different stories. Make it real for them. Done. We'll coordinate through Captain Williams. Torres extended his hand one more time. Thank you, Sergeant, for your service, and for giving us a chance to do better. They shook, and for a moment Hector allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this would actually lead somewhere. That Baylor's cruelty might become the catalyst for change that helped thousands of veterans he'd never meet. The drive back to Glendale was quiet. Hector's mind processing the last 24 hours. From humiliation in a parking lot to a press conference with the chief of police. From feeling helpless to feeling like maybe he had power after all. His phone buzzed. A text from Morrison. Just watched the press conference. You were amazing, man. Made me proud to have stood with you. Then another from Begay. My unit's talking about your speech. You inspired people today. Then a message from a number he didn't recognize. I'm a disabled vet in Tucson. Saw your story. Thank you for fighting. It matters. One after another, messages flooded in. Veterans across Arizona and beyond thanking him, sharing their own stories, pledging support. The network that had started as 47 people in a parking lot was growing into something regional, maybe national. Hector pulled into his driveway just as his phone rang. Unknown number, but he answered. Mr. Ruiz, this is Amanda Foster from the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm calling on behalf of the Secretary. He saw your story on the news and wanted to express his support. He's also directing all VA facilities nationwide to review their accessible parking enforcement protocols and local law enforcement partnerships. Hector sat stunned. Nationwide? Yes, sir. What happened to you in Phoenix is being used as a case study for what not to allow. We're turning your experience into systemic improvement across the entire VA system. After the call ended, Hector sat in his van for a long time, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Gunnar barked from inside, demanding dinner and attention. Normal life waited, but nothing felt normal anymore. He'd become a symbol, a catalyst, a face attached to reforms that could help millions of veterans and disabled citizens across the country. And all because one cop had forgotten that the wheelchair didn't define him. It was the uniform underneath that mattered. The one you earned, not the one you wore. 3 weeks passed like combat time, long stretches of tedium punctuated by moments of intense activity. Hector found himself living 2 lives, the quiet one where he fed Gunnar and did physical therapy and tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, and the public one where he became the face of a movement he hadn't asked to lead. The disciplinary hearing for Officer Trent Baylor was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 900 hours. Hector arrived at the Phoenix PD administrative building to find the parking lot already filling with veterans. Crews had organized transportation for anyone who needed it, and the turnout was staggering. Easily 100 people, maybe more, all wearing unit patches or service organization shirts. A silent army gathered to witness accountability. Colonel Park met him at the entrance dressed in civilian clothes today, but carrying the same command presence. You ready for this? Do I have a choice? Always. You can walk away right now. Let the process play out without you. No one would blame you. Hector looked at the assembled veterans, saw Morrison talking quietly with Begay, saw that Vietnam vet from the VA holding a sign that read, "Dignity Matters." Saw a young woman in a wheelchair, Army based on her jacket, who'd driven 3 hours from Flagstaff just to be here. No, Hector said. I need to see it through. The hearing room was smaller than expected, more like a courtroom than a conference room. A 3-person panel sat at an elevated desk. Deputy Chief Morrison, a civilian oversight representative, and a police union attorney. Officer Baylor sat at a table with his lawyer, a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit who'd clearly handled these situations before. Baylor looked different than he had in the parking lot. Smaller somehow, his swagger replaced by barely concealed anxiety. He wore his dress uniform ribbons, displayed an attempt to remind everyone he was more than one bad decision. But his eyes were hard, resentful, the look of a man who believed he'd been wronged. Lieutenant Chen from Internal Affairs presented the findings. Methodical, thorough damning. Video evidence played on screens mounted around the room, showing Baylor's sneer, his aggressive posture the moment he'd called Hector wheelchair boy with such casual cruelty. Hector watched Baylor watch the video, saw the moment recognition flickered across his face, not shame, but calculation. The realization that this was really happening, that consequences were coming, whether he thought they were deserved or not. Chen called witnesses. Officer Reyes testified first, her voice steady but strained. I advised Officer Baylor that the vehicle appeared to be in compliance. He insisted on proceeding with enforcement action. When I questioned his judgment, he told me to mind my own business. Did you consider the enforcement action appropriate? Morrison asked. Reyes met Baylor's eyes across the room. Whatever partnership they'd had was dead now, burned away by his choices. No, ma'am. The permits were clearly visible. The vehicle was properly parked, and Officer Baylor's language toward Mr. Ruiz was completely inappropriate. Baylor's lawyer cross-examined aggressively. But you didn't stop him, did you? You didn't formally object or refuse to participate. I advised against it multiple times, but you didn't prevent it. Doesn't that make you complicit? Objection, Chen said sharply. Officer Reyes isn't the subject of this hearing. Morrison sustained it, but the damage was visible on Reyes's face. She'd carry guilt for not doing more, even though doing more might have cost her career. Next came civilian witnesses. Cruz testified about Baylor's demeanor, his clear intent to humiliate rather than enforce. Williams presented her legal analysis of the ADA violations. A tow truck driver who'd refused other questionable calls from Baylor in the past testified about a pattern of targeting vulnerable people. Then Detective Sarah Chen took the stand. We reviewed Officer Baylor's complete personnel file and disciplinary history. In 8 years with Phoenix PD, he accumulated 17 complaints. 5 involved aggressive behavior toward disabled individuals, homeless veterans, or other vulnerable populations. 3 more involved excessive force. 2 concerned improper arrest procedures. 17 complaints, Morrison repeated. How many resulted in discipline? 4 written reprimands. 1 3-day suspension. The rest were deemed unsubstantiated or resolved through counseling. Why? Chen's expression hardened. Because most complainants were transient homeless or otherwise difficult to locate for follow-up. Because video evidence wasn't always available. Because the benefit of the doubt typically goes to the officer. And because, frankly, our system wasn't designed to catch patterns, just individual incidents. Has that changed? As of this hearing, yes. We're implementing a pattern tracking database. Any officer with more than 3 complaints in similar categories triggers automatic review. We're also requiring body camera activation for all enforcement actions involving vulnerable populations. Baylor shifted in his seat, jaw clenched. His lawyer whispered urgently, probably advising him to stay calm, maintain composure. Finally, Morrison looked at Hector. Mr. Ruiz, would you like to make a statement? Every eye in the room turned to him. Hector wheeled forward to the witness area, suddenly aware of how small he looked compared to the elevated panel, the formal setting the weight of institutional process. I don't want to be here, he started, voice quiet but carrying. I wanted to see my doctor, get my prosthetics adjusted, maybe grab lunch. Instead, I'm sitting in a police hearing because one of your officers decided I was less than human. Baylor's lawyer started to object, but Morrison waved him down. People see the wheelchair and think that's all I am. They don't see the 3 tours, the Marines I carried out of kill zones, the 18 months of physical therapy that hurt worse than the injury itself. They just see disabled and think weak, think target, think this person won't fight back. Hector's hands gripped the wheelchair armrests. Officer Baylor saw the wheelchair and thought he could do whatever he wanted. And honestly, he almost got away with it. If not for the Marines who showed up, if not for the cameras, if not for good officers like Reyes who found their courage, he would have towed my van, and I would have spent weeks fighting to get it back, and nothing would have changed. He looked directly at Baylor. I don't hate you. I pity you. Because you're so small inside that you needed to make a disabled veteran feel smaller just to feel big, and that's sad. That's pathetic. But it's also dangerous. Because the badge you wore gave you power, and you used it to hurt instead of help. Baylor's mask cracked. Anger flashed across his face, raw and undeniable. I forgive you, Hector continued. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying that hatred would hurt me more than it hurts you. But forgiveness doesn't mean no consequences. It means I hope you learn from this. I hope you become better. And I hope no one else ever has to feel what I felt in that parking lot. The room was silent when Hector wheeled back to his seat. Morrison made notes, her expression unreadable. The union attorney looked uncomfortable. And Baylor sat rigid, staring straight ahead, jaw working like he was chewing glass. The panel deliberated for 45 minutes. Everyone waited in the hallway, veterans lining the walls in silent solidarity. Morrison appeared from the hospital once buying a coffee from a vending machine, and several veterans stood when she passed. Not aggressive, just present. A reminder that they were watching. Finally, the panel reconvened. Morrison read from prepared notes, her voice formal and carrying the weight of institutional authority. After reviewing all evidence, witness testimony, and Officer Baylor's service record, this panel finds that Officer Trent Baylor violated Phoenix Police Department policy in multiple areas, specifically unauthorized enforcement action, discriminatory language, and conduct failure to properly assess compliance with accessibility regulations and conduct unbecoming an officer. These violations are severe, repeated, and demonstrate a pattern of behavior incompatible with our departmental values. Baylor's hands gripped the table-edge knuckles white. Therefore, this panel recommends termination of employment effective immediately. Officer Baylor's badge and service weapon were surrendered at the commencement of administrative leave. His identification and department credentials will be permanently revoked. Additionally, we are forwarding this case to the county attorney and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division for consideration of criminal charges. Baylor exploded. This is bullshit. I was doing my job. That parking lot's been a problem for months. Sit down, Officer Baylor. Morrison's voice cut like a blade. You're railroading me because you're scared of bad publicity, because some Marine with good PR complained loud enough. Officer Baylor! Morrison slammed her gavel. You are out of order. One more outburst and you'll be removed. Baylor's lawyer pulled him back into his seat, hissing urgent warnings. But the damage was done. The mask had fully cracked, revealing the entitled rage underneath. The belief that he was the victim here, that consequences were unfair, that targeting vulnerable people was just doing his job. Morrison waited for silence. This hearing is concluded. Officer Baylor, you have 30 days to appeal this decision through the appropriate channels. But let me be clear, the evidence against you is overwhelming. The pattern is undeniable, and this department will not tolerate officers who abuse their authority to harass and intimidate the citizens they're sworn to protect. She stood, and the room rose with her. This panel is adjourned. Outside, the veterans erupted in measured celebration. Not cheering too disciplined for that, but approving nods, firm handshakes, the satisfaction of watching accountability actually function. Cruz gripped Hector's shoulder. It's done. He's done. For now, Hector said. He can appeal. The union will fight it. Let them fight. We've got this on record. We've got termination. And we've got reforms coming that'll make sure the next Baylor doesn't last 8 years. Cruz smiled. This is a win, brother. Take it. Park appeared with Williams, both women looking professionally satisfied. The county attorney's office just issued a statement. They're convening a grand jury to consider charges. DOJ is also opening a formal investigation. Baylor's career in law enforcement is over. What about other departments? Morrison asked, joining the conversation. Can he just move to another city? Not easily, Williams said. Termination for cause goes on his permanent record. Any department that hires him after this would face massive liability. He's done. The celebration moved to Murphy's Tavern again, but this time it felt different. Less urgent, more reflective. A battle won, but the war continuing. Because Baylor's termination was just one piece of a larger puzzle. The real work came in the weeks that followed. The first training session under the Ruiz Protocol was held on a Saturday morning voluntary attendance for off-duty officers, but strongly encouraged by Chief Torres. 83 cops showed up, filling the department's community room. Hector sat at the front with 5 other veterans. Morrison Begay, a Navy corpsman who'd lost her hearing to a blast injury, an Air Force captain with severe PTSD, and that Vietnam vet from the VA whose name turned out to be Robert Chen. Torres introduced them simply. These are the people you're sworn to protect. Listen to them, learn from them, and understand that the badge doesn't give you the right to judge who's deserving of respect. It gives you the responsibility to provide it to everyone. Hector spoke first, walking them through the parking lot incident minute by minute. Not just what happened, but what it felt like. The humiliation, the powerlessness. The moment he'd wondered if this was how it would end, not in combat, but in a VA parking lot, dignity stripped away by someone who should have understood. You see someone in a wheelchair, and you make assumptions, Hector said. You see the disability, not the person, not the service, not the sacrifice, just the wheelchair. And those assumptions leak into how you interact with us. Sometimes in small ways, talking down to us, talking to our companions, instead of directly to us, assuming we need help we haven't asked for. Sometimes in big ways, like Officer Baylor ordering a tow because he decided I didn't look disabled enough. He paused, looking around the room at faces ranging from defensive to genuinely engaged. I'm not asking you to give us special treatment. I'm asking you to see us as people first, to check your assumptions, to understand that accessibility permits exist for a reason, and questioning their legitimacy should require actual evidence, not just your gut feeling that someone doesn't look disabled enough. Morrison spoke next, raw and emotional, about coming home from Afghanistan, with survivor's guilt so crushing he'd considered eating his service weapon. About panic attacks in grocery stores, about the cop who'd responded to a call about him having a breakdown in a parking lot and had taken the time to just sit with him, talk him down, connect him with resources instead of treating him like a threat. That officer saved my life, Morrison said. Not because he did anything extraordinary, just because he treated me like a human being having the worst day of his life. That's what we need from you. Not pity, not special treatment. Just basic human decency backed by training that helps you recognize when someone needs help instead of handcuffs. Begay talked about invisible disabilities, about PTSD, and traumatic brain injuries that didn't show up on body scans, but were just as real as missing limbs. The Navy corpsman demonstrated her cochlear implant and talked about how cops yelling commands she couldn't hear had nearly gotten her arrested. The Air Force captain discussed how bright lights and loud noises could trigger PTSD episodes that looked like drug use or mental illness to untrained observers. Robert Chen closed it out with Vietnam-era stories that reminded everyone this wasn't a new problem. 50 years I've been navigating this world with combat wounds. 50 years of people making assumptions, questioning my legitimacy, treating my service like ancient history that doesn't matter anymore. And I'm tired. We're all tired. Tired of having to prove ourselves. Tired of having to educate every authority figure we encounter. Tired of fighting for respect we already earned. The room was silent when he finished. Several officers were wiping their eyes. One young cop couldn't have been more than 25, raised his hand. What do we do? How do we do better? Ask before assuming, Hector said. If you're not sure if someone needs help, ask. If you're questioning a permit's validity, check the database before calling a tow. If someone seems non-compliant, consider whether they might have a disability that affects communication. And most importantly, remember that your authority is a tool for protecting people, not for proving you're in charge. Torres stood. Everything you heard today becomes policy. Not suggestions, not guidelines. Policy. You will treat disabled individuals and veterans with the respect they deserve, or you will answer to me. Questions. A veteran officer in the back raised his hand. Chief, what about situations where someone's actually faking? Where they're using accessibility privileges they don't qualify for? Then you document it properly and follow established procedure, Torres said. But your default assumption is legitimacy unless you have actual evidence otherwise. A placard is evidence. A permit is evidence. Your gut feeling is not evidence. And under no circumstances do you ever demand someone prove their disability by disclosing medical information or demonstrating physical limitations. That's a HIPAA violation and an ADA violation, and it will get you fired. Are we clear? Yes, sir. The training lasted 4 hours. By the end, even the skeptical cops seemed to understand. More importantly, several approached Hector afterward to share their own stories. Family members with disabilities, personal injuries, experiences that had given them perspective they wished they'd had earlier. Officer Davidson, the young cop from the press conference, waited until the crowd cleared. Sergeant Ruiz, I just wanted you to know, I'm leaving the academy where I trained, volunteering to help develop new curriculum on disability awareness. Because what happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone, and we need to teach future cops better. Hector shook his hand. That's exactly the kind of change we need. Thank you. The City Council vote on the Ruiz Protocol Ordinance came 3 weeks later. Park had mobilized the network, ruthlessly packing the council chambers with veterans, disability advocates, and community members who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of the solution. When the council president called for public comment, the line stretched out the door. Speaker after speaker told stories. Veterans who'd faced harassment, disabled citizens who'd been questioned, doubted, humiliated, family members who'd watched loved ones struggle against systems that should have helped them. The testimony lasted 6 hours, and by the end, even the most skeptical council member looked shaken. The vote was unanimous. 7-0, the Ruiz Protocol became Phoenix City law. Mandatory training for all police officers, clear procedures for accessibility enforcement, civilian oversight committee with real investigative power, penalties for officers who violated the protocol, and a commitment to annual review and updates based on community feedback. Chief Torres called Hector that evening. We did it. Real reform written into law, protected from future administrations who might not care as much. This is your legacy. It's not mine, Hector said. It's ours. Everyone who showed up, who testified, who pushed this belongs to all of us. Maybe so. But you're the one who had the courage to stand up when it would have been easier to let it go. That matters. After the call ended, Hector sat on his back porch with Gunnar watching the desert sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. His phone buzzed constantly messages from veterans across the state, across the country, telling him about similar reforms being considered in their cities. The Ruiz Protocol was spreading, becoming a model for departments nationwide. The Department of Veterans Affairs had implemented new guidelines for all VA facilities requiring local law enforcement partnerships to include disability awareness training. 3 other states were drafting legislation based on Arizona's approach. A national veterans organization had invited Hector to speak at their annual convention. It was overwhelming, it was exhausting, and it was exactly what needed to happen. 6 months after that morning in the parking lot, Hector returned to the Phoenix VA for a routine appointment. He parked in row C spot 7, the same spot where everything had started. But this time, when he deployed his wheelchair lift, a young Phoenix PD officer was conducting a foot patrol nearby. The officer approached, and Hector felt his stomach clench with muscle memory. "Good morning, sir," the officer said respectfully. "Just wanted to let you know we've added extra patrols to this area, making sure our veterans feel safe and supported." He gestured to the accessible parking spaces. "These spots are well marked and well protected now. If anyone gives you trouble, you call dispatch immediately. We take accessibility violations seriously." "I appreciate that, officer." "Are you Hector Ruiz?" The officer's eyes widened. "The Sergeant Ruiz," just Hector. "Sir, I went through the training. Your training. It changed how I think about my job. Thank you for that." The officer extended his hand. "I'm Officer Marcus Webb, and I promise you what happened to you won't happen on my watch." They shook hands, and Hector felt something release in his chest. Not all the pain that would always be there, but some of the anger, some of the fear. Because this officer wasn't Baylor. This officer had learned, had changed, had chosen to be better. Inside the VA, a new plaque hung by the entrance. Brass formal reading. "This facility honors all veterans and their right to access care with dignity. The Ruiz Protocol ensures your service is recognized and your needs are respected. Thank you for your sacrifice." Maria, his prosthetics nurse, saw him and smiled. "Hector, you're famous. We've had 3 other VA facilities ask us for advice on implementing similar protocols. You started something big." "We started something," Hector corrected. "All of us." The appointment went smoothly. Dr. Patel adjusted his prosthetics, scheduled the next follow-up, and sent him on his way with a reminder to do his physical therapy exercises. Normal. Routine. Exactly what Hector had wanted from the beginning. But as he wheeled back to his van, passing that brass plaque, seeing Officer Webb still on patrol, noticing the improved signage and lighting in the accessible parking area, Hector realized something important. Normal had changed. Routine had improved. And maybe, just maybe, the next veteran who parked here would never know how hard people had fought to make it safe. That was the whole point. Real change wasn't loud. It was quiet infrastructure improvements and training protocols and officers who understood their responsibility. It was disabled veterans parking without fear, accessing care, without harassment, living their lives without having to constantly prove their worth. Colonel Park had launched her Stand To hotline officially, a 24/7 number for veterans facing harassment anywhere in Arizona. In the first month, they'd responded to 43 calls and resolved 39 without requiring police intervention. Just presence, just community, just the knowledge that you weren't alone. Baylor's appeal had been denied. The county attorney had declined to prosecute criminally not enough evidence for beyond reasonable doubt. But his law enforcement career was over. Last Hector heard, he was working security at a shopping mall, still bitter, still convinced he'd been wronged. Some people never learned, but others did. Officer Reyes had been promoted to training coordinator, developing new curriculum for the academy. Lieutenant Chen had become the public face of the department's reform efforts. Chief Torres had been recognized nationally for his leadership in implementing meaningful change. And Hector, he went back to his quiet life. Back to VA appointments and physical therapy and afternoons with Gunner. But he also consulted on training programs, spoke at police academies, advised other cities on implementing similar protocols, not because he wanted to be famous, but because the work mattered. Morrison called him sometimes late at night when the survivor's guilt got bad. They'd talk through it veteran to veteran, reminder to reminder, that being alive wasn't something to apologize for. Begay organized monthly meetups for the network that had formed in that parking lot, keeping the connections alive. Williams had taken on 3 more cases of disability discrimination, using the Ruiz precedent to push for change. A year later, on the anniversary of that morning, the VA held a dedication ceremony. They'd installed a wall of honor featuring photos and stories of veterans who'd overcome obstacles to continue serving their communities. Hector's photo was their wheelchair, and all alongside Morrison and Begay and Robert Chen and dozens of others. Chief Torres attended shaking hands and thanking veterans for their patience as the department had implemented reforms. He'd recently been diagnosed with cancer, treatable but serious, and the experience of navigating medical care with a disability had given him even deeper perspective on what Hector had faced. "I get it now," Torres said quietly, standing beside Hector in front of the wall. "Really get it. The vulnerability, the fear that someone in authority will decide you're not worth the trouble, the exhaustion of constantly having to advocate for yourself when you're already fighting just to function." "Welcome to the club nobody wants to join," Hector said, not unkindly. "I'm sorry for what Baylor did, for the system that enabled him, for every moment you had to feel afraid in your own community. You fixed it, that's what matters. You could have offered empty apologies and moved on. Instead, you did the work. That's rare." They stood in silence for a moment. 2 men who'd served in different ways, now united by understanding what it meant to navigate the world when your body wouldn't cooperate and systems didn't care. "You know what I think about sometimes," Hector said. "The tow truck driver. The guy who refused to hook up my van. He made a choice that day, chose right over following orders. I never thanked him." "He knows," Torres said. "His company's been getting business from veterans ever since. Good choices echo." That night back at Murphy's Tavern for the anniversary gathering, the crowd was huge. Easily 200 people, maybe more. Veterans who'd been there from the beginning. Others who'd joined later. Civilians who'd heard the story and wanted to support. It had become something bigger than any individual a community built, around the simple principle that everyone deserved dignity. Park stood to speak, raising a beer in toast. "1 year ago, a Marine got hassled in a parking lot, and 47 people answered the call. Today we're 2,000 strong across Arizona with networks forming in 6 other states. We've responded to over 400 calls for help. We've helped implement reforms in 12 cities. We've shown the country that veterans don't stop serving when we take off the uniform, we just find new battles to fight. And new ways to win them," Cruz added, raising his own beer. "To Hector, to accountability, to the belief that we can make things better if we're willing to fight for it. To brotherhood," Morrison said, "to showing up when it matters." The toasts continued, each person adding their own tribute. But when they looked to Hector, he shook his head. "I'm not good at speeches. You all know that." He smiled at the laughter. "But I want to say this. A year ago, I felt helpless. Today, I feel powerful. Not because I'm stronger or braver than I was, but because I understand something I'd forgotten. That we're never alone. That the tribe protects its own. And that real change, lasting change, comes from people who refuse to accept injustice as inevitable." He looked around the room at faces that had become family. "Officer Baylor thought the wheelchair made me weak, thought he could do whatever he wanted because who would stop him? He forgot that Marines don't abandon each other, that veterans remember what service really means, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a badge, it's a community that gives a damn. The room erupted in applause, but Hector raised a hand. One more thing. This can't be the end. This has to be the beginning. We've fixed Phoenix. Now we fix everywhere else. We keep showing up, keep fighting, keep demanding that the people we protect get protected in return. Because that's what Marines do. That's what veterans do. We don't quit, we don't back down. And we sure as hell don't let anyone face their battles alone. The celebration lasted until midnight, stories and laughter, and the kind of bonds that only form when people stand together against impossible odds. As Hector finally made his way to his van, Cruz walking beside him out of habit, he looked up at the desert sky. Somewhere in Phoenix tonight, a veteran would park at the VA tomorrow morning, would deploy their wheelchair lift or use their walker or navigate with their service dog. And they would do it without fear, without harassment, without some badge-heavy cop deciding they looked too healthy or too mobile or not disabled enough. Because 47 Marines had answered a call. Because a colonel had organized a movement. Because a city had chosen accountability. Because real change, the kind that echoed, happened when good people refused to let injustice become normal. Hector Ruiz had survived IEDs and combat and 18 months of physical therapy. He'd lost his legs, but kept his dignity. And when a bully with a badge had tried to take that dignity away, he'd discovered something more powerful than any weapon he'd carried in Fallujah. He'd discovered that the uniform didn't make you bulletproof. The brothers and sisters standing beside you did.